if you guys are just starting to go out, you're getting into conversations, and while you're in the conversation, the vibe level starts going down, and you feel it going down probably even, and then it gets really down, and then it's awkward, and the girl either leaves, the guy leaves, or you feel the need to eject. As you go through this more and more and more though, you'll start to see the signs way ahead of time. I never get to a point where the vibe gets super down and super awkward and I'm stuck there standing around looking, and either me or the girl is like, okay, like, have a good night. It would never get to that point. I know way ahead of time where we're at and if it's like gonna go that way or not. Ideally, you can see the signs and just based off of the feeling and the vibe, know that where you're at. And I'd much rather you leave the interaction at a high point. Or not even a high point, you just leave the interaction when it's at a decent point. Because if you stay in the set till it gets extremely low and extremely awkward and uncomfortable, and then you leave, you're not gonna be able to go back up to that person later on in the night. If you've ever stayed in set until the girl fully rejected you, or it just got awkward, and then you saw her later on in the night, that girl will not make eye contact with you for anything, dude. That girl's gonna avoid you like a fucking plague, bro. She's gonna be on the other side of the fucking nightclub the whole time. When you're over here, she's here. Like, she will not look at you either because she has that weird, awkward feeling correlated to you. If you're at a point where you're running out of things to say and you really can't get past it and you feel like you're prematurely ejecting from the interaction, well then, look, man, the reality is you gotta stay in the set and you gotta get uncomfortable with those moments. Here's the other thing is like, I'm very comfortable with silence. I'm very comfortable in an interaction. It never becomes awkward. The interaction doesn't necessarily need to die just because there's a little bit of silence, but you guys need to do everything you can to keep talking after that point. There's two different concepts I'm bringing up here. One of them is if you're a dude that's really struggling, that's running out of things to say and you can't get past the first 1, 2, 3 minutes of a conversation, well, look, dude, you're gonna have to stay in set and you have to keep trying in those uncomfortable moments. You're gonna say 1 or 2 things, it's gonna be uncomfortable, you're gonna sit there, you're gonna think, and you're gonna come up with another topic, or maybe you really struggle in that one and it becomes awkward. Like, I have this one memory of being in set with this girl one time and I completely ran out of things to say to the point where I was just like, like, honestly, that's all I got. Like, it was literally to the point where I'm just like, that's all I got. Like, I don't know what else to say. I think I was like, okay, all right, have a good night then, as I walk away. If you're struggling at that level where you're constantly struggling to come up with the next thing, the only way you're gonna get over that, guys, is by staying in set. You gotta stay in set. You gotta force yourself to stay there in that awkward, uncomfortable moment, and eventually you'll start coming up with things. And eventually it'll get to a point where you don't run out. You don't run out. I could run a 5-hour interaction. I don't run out of shit to say. Why? Because the skill set has been built up enough. Okay, so if you're really struggling, cool, dude, you're gonna have to just stay in the set longer and longer and longer. Now, here's the opposite side of it, which is a little contradicting to what I just told you, but I feel like it's worth noting, is that the more you get into interactions, the more you'll start to have an intuition about the vibe, about how the conversation's going and this and that. Okay, this isn't for beginners. This is if you've gotten over that first hurdle. But if you're somebody that's a good conversationalist, you can start to see ahead of time that the conversation isn't gonna go anywhere. You can start to see ahead of time that the vibe is inevitably going to die at some point. If that's the case, I'd much rather end the interaction while it's still at a good point where I could be like, anyway, I actually gotta get going. I gotta meet up with some friends. I'm meeting them here. It was a pleasure meeting you. Maybe I'll see you later. Cheers, let's have a fucking epic night. Have some fun. I'll talk to you later. And I can toast and I can leave that interaction. Because it didn't go to complete failure and awkwardness, and I ended it on a good point, now I can go back in and reopen that set later on. If it's awkward when I leave, I'm not gonna be able to reopen. The person already categorized me with a certain emotion correlated to me, right? But if I leave the interaction at a decent point, I could go back and reopen later on. Which is another reason I tell some of you guys, hey, if it's the beginning of the night, you're just starting to get warmed up, take the pressure off of yourself, have really short interactions. You open, you get in a conversation, you talk to the person just for a little bit, cool. Hey, anyway, I'll catch up with you guys later. It was a pleasure. Have some fun tonight. Maybe I'll see you in a little bit. I'm gonna go meet up with some friends. Cheers. You can have some really short interactions because you're just warming up, but also because, look, man, if you're not at that high of a level, most likely the conversation is gonna die out. So like, bounce around, get warmed up. If it was a decent lead, you could reopen them later when you're a little bit more warmed up. and there's now some familiarity built up, and maybe it can actually go somewhere now. I'm not saying you gotta always do this, and I'm not saying you gotta always stick in the set. It depends on your skill level. It depends on where you're struggling right now. It also depends on at what point in the night is it too. Is it really early on in the night? Okay, the earlier on it is, the shorter the interactions are. We're just getting warmed up. Just open a couple people, keep it short, end it on a high point, move on. You could reopen them later. If it's the middle third or if it's towards the very end of the night, probably more beneficial to try to stay in the set and make something happen. If it ends up becoming a little awkward or uncomfortable, you stay in the set because that's where you've been struggling, and we're trying to actually push the skill set. The reason you can become quick-witty and improvisational in conversation is through a learned experience of doing that. I've been put in the situation. I've thrown my brain into those interactions so many times that now I'm so quick that I could just come up with a new topic, and it never gets to that awkward point. Okay, so you do both of these things depending on what time of the night it is and where you're at in your level of the progression.